Sitting down with a classmate in the classroom while there was a free moment, Jake asked, "Why are you so sad, Brian? Something happened." The man looked at him with empty eyes and said, "That's it. Family problems. I found out that my father lied to me for many years. You must admit that this discovery is very unpleasant." Alex put down his backpack and said, "Do not rush to judge your father. Perhaps he had no other choice or did it without wishing you harm. It is difficult to judge whether this is correct or not. First of all, you need to find out all the circumstances and reasons, and only then conclude." Brian took out a child's photo from his pocket, in which his father accompanied him to the first class, and muttered with displeasure, "Here, from these very years he lied to me, and not just now. And I want to understand why Dad did it." Other students began to enter the classroom, and the conversation had to be interrupted. Only 3 hours later, when the couple ended, they again continued to communicate, however, this time in a cafe nearby, where they liked to go for a cup of delicious coffee. The guys sat down at a table and continued their conversation. "You know, Jake, that I have no mother and was raised only by my father and grandmother. I started asking questions about my mother quite early, but I saw that all my peers have a mother, and I don't. When I was little, my father told me that my mother was very ill and that she was no longer with us. I wasn't sure what it was, but it was an explanation. The older I got, the more insistently I asked why we never went to my mother's grave. My father started to deny it again, but then he confessed what happened. It turns out that Mom left me and Dad just like that, silently took things and left. Of course, I believed that the Pope was an unquestionable authority, and I didn't even have the slightest doubt. Because of this, I lived with resentment towards my mother, and sometimes I had the idea to find her, but after listening to my father, he asked the only question, 'Why do you need this, son?' Really? Why?" And recently, our relatives gathered at home. We do not meet very often, only a couple of times a year. Dad's rather drunk cousin took me aside and started muttering something, that I didn't know the truth, and that my mother had gone missing for a reason. My father turned out to be a scoundrel and treated her like a pig since my mother was a golden man. I tried to ask him more about it, but found out nothing more. Alex pulled over the cup of coffee that had just been brought to him. "Here, wet your throat. Otherwise, you're already starting to wheeze." "So, what does this mean? You learned some information from a relative, but in fact, nothing significant. And now you think that your father cheated on you. Listen, Brian, all this is written with a pitchfork on the water. Most likely, this is just drunken nonsense and gossip, nothing more. How do you even believe that?" Brian wanted to say something to him, but Alex stopped him. No. Wait. I haven't finished yet. Your father, Mike Johnson, is a very respected man. And don't you know how much effort and money he puts into your life? I do not know why you suddenly decided to believe this relative, who, perhaps, was just offended by something and decided to annoy your father in this way. And Brian suddenly thought, maybe Jake is right, and I shouldn't suspect my father of treason? Suddenly his phone rang and his thoughts were interrupted by the words, "Yes, hi, Emily, of course I'll meet you at the old place." Looking at his cheerful face, Alex slyly asked, "Is this the same girl you met a week ago? Well, you're sly, Brian. At least introduce your best friend to her." However, when he met his wary gaze, he added, "Oh, well, I'm not going to resist. It would just be a lot more fun to walk around in company." Nodding in agreement, Brian answered, "Maybe another time. Definitely not today." Alex continued, "What about your father? Does he know you're dating this Emily?" "Not yet, but I'll tell him everything." "Besidis, we've only been dating for a week. And now, until this situation is clarified, I don't want to tell him anything at all." Jacob finished his coffee and said, "Okay, friend, I have to go home. If you want to invite me to your company, call me." Waving his hand in response, Brian ordered another cup of coffee and 2 cakes. Now he could calmly consider how to proceed. Had his father lied to him all these years? After all, he blindly believed that she refused him and drove off in an unknown direction. And what is most interesting during all this time, no one from the inner circle even tried to challenge this version. And now, when he is already an adult guy, suddenly a relative appears and begins to open up. However, they did not have a detailed conversation, but even what he'd learned had left him with a storm of doubts. Thinking about how he could get to the bottom of the truth, Brian thought of his grandmother. After all, she had always treated him favorably and was unlikely to refuse a truthful conversation. However, first of all, a date with Emily, especially since they have already agreed. After ordering a taxi, he was in the city park in 20 minutes. It was here that they most often spent their free time. Soon the girl herself appeared and won his heart. An elegant female figure was approaching the guy. "What a good girl she is, just a miracle, not a girl," Brian told himself. Slightly out of breath, Emily sat down on the bench. "Are you all right?" The guy said, "Yes, but why do you ask?" The girl smiled. "I do not know, it probably sounded like you were upset." He deliberately did not talk about the misunderstanding with his father, because in fact, he did not know where the truth was and where the lie was. And even more so, why would Emily know about unpleasant family secrets? Putting his arm around her shoulders, Brian continued. "Better tell me, how was your day? What was interesting or all the same, no changes?" Emily smiled back. "In our beauty salon, only customers can surprise you with something, if this is what you want to hear." Brian frowned as if offended by something. "Yes, you can't argue with that, especially since the client is always right. By the way, why did you decide to work there? Since you yourself said that you have teacher training. Now teachers and tutors are in demand, and these professions bring many more benefits than a simple hairdresser." Emily treated Brian with a certain amount of humor. "I don't argue. But imagine that your hair has grown almost to your feet. How will you behave? Namely, that you will still come to us because the hair gets in the way. But seriously, I love my work very much and treat it like a piece of creativity or art that people really need." During their conversation, Brian barely managed to restrain himself from accidentally blurting out his personal problems. After all, he trusted Emily and believed that there should be no secrets between them. The young men got up from the bench and walked down the alley. Seeing the stalls with sweets, Brian offered to buy ice cream and at the same time take a little walk. Emily agreed, and in a couple of minutes they were enjoying a chocolate sundae and watching the ducks swimming in the pond. There is nothing more pleasant than spending time with the person you consider your soulmate on a warm, fine day. And even if their meetings have only just begun, a certain spark of love has already managed to slip between them. Eating ice cream, the lovers just reached the end of the park. Emily looked at her watch and said excitedly, "I completely forgot. I need to go home right away. We have company tonight, and we must hurry, or they will be offended that I am not at home." Brian didn't mind, especially since he was in a hurry to visit someone else. Now he was going to visit his grandmother, who was the only person who could shed light on the family secret. Well, if she didn't help, then Brian was determined to go to his uncle and get the truth out of him at all costs. 10 minutes later, the right bus arrived. Emily kissed Brian on the cheek and entered the salon. She waved at him through the window and immediately slid into the empty seat. All he could see was her back until the bus pulled away a good distance. Having bought his grandmother's favorite sweets on the way, Brian went to the entrance and went up to the 3rd floor. Carefully, so as not to make any noise, he knocked on the door. A few seconds later, I heard the shuffle of slippers. "I'm coming. I'll open it now." Seeing her grandson on the threshold, Patricia was slightly confused. "Oh, John, I wasn't expecting you." "Well, come on in. Why stand in the doorway? Let's go straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on." By the time his grandmother closed the door behind him, he had already filled the cups and turned on the electric kettle. Sitting down at the table opposite her grandson, Patricia narrowed one eye and asked cautiously, "John, how are you doing? You don't often go out in the middle of the week like this." He ran a nervous hand through his hair and said, "You know, Graham, I have questions that Dad doesn't want to answer or pretends he doesn't know anything about." Grandma shrugged her shoulders and said cautiously, "Then I can hardly help you either if Dave doesn't know." John seems to have anticipated this response. "I know that the disappearance of my mother is not so simple. Or rather, my father's brother told me about it. No details really, but I think you have something to say? Probably enough to lead your own grandson by the nosy." Patricia even started, as if she had been caught in a crime. "Yes, no, John, I know almost nothing, and Dave probably already explained everything to you." And this move John provided, so he started from the other side. "Then I will try to find it myself no matter what, and if I'm lucky, I'll find out the whole truth." Grandma jumped up from her chair and went into the room, and when she came back, she put a photograph on the table in front of him. "This is all that's left of your mom. She really left the family, but not of her own free will. Dave forced her to do it. I'm sorry I didn't say anything for so long, but there's probably no point in hiding the past now." Then John found out from the words of his grandmother that his father, when he first started living with his mother, was an ordinary hard worker. It was only then, with her help, that he made connections and rose to a good position. The more money your father had, the worse he treated his wife. They absolutely could not find a common language. A day did not pass without a scandal and swearing. The quiet, unassuming Carol clearly didn't suit your father anymore, but he loved you very much. As a result, as the grandmother admitted, Carol, who was the name of John's mother, was no longer needed, and Dave simply kicked her out of the house. The divorce process passed quickly, leaving his wife without money and housing, and the worst part was without a son. The corrupt judges decided you'd be better off with your father. Dave even obtained a court ban on dating, and on his own behalf threatened Carol that he would put her in a psychiatric hospital if she tried to see her son. At that time, John was only 3 years old, and it was natural that he did not remember anything. Carefully hiding the photo, John said, "Well, now, at least I know what her name is and what she looks like." After finishing his tea, John thanked his grandmother for her hospitality and left. On the street, he took out the photo again and thought to himself, "We need to involve Jake in the search. He is a master in this field." But before that, John wanted to talk openly with his father. After all, it turns out that the relative told the truth, and his own father really hid the truth. Inside, everything was burning. His thoughts were confused. It seemed that such a familiar, so understandable world simply collapsed. His father turned out to be a scoundrel, and his mother, whom he had considered a traitor all his life, turned out to be an unfortunate victim. John decided to walk home to calm down and at least sort out his thoughts a little. Lost in his dark thoughts, the guy was passing by the store when out of the corner of his eye, he noticed an elderly lady who was leaning against the wall. Gasping for air, she tried to call out to passers-by for help, but a severe pain in her chest prevented her from doing so. John barely managed to grab her sleeve. "What's wrong with you?" "Pills, in a black bag, a small pocket on the side." Somehow managed to squeeze out the woman. The guy quickly found a medicine and, giving her a pill, offered to walk to the store. "Let me help you. Take your time and catch your breath, otherwise you have no face at all. Maybe I should call an ambulance because you don't look well." In response, the old lady shook her head. "Don't, son. It'll all go away now. Thank you for your help. I'm going to visit you in from and score full packages of goodies. I was tired right away, of course, and now I'm getting over it. Son, if you're not in a hurry, just sit down for a while, and then I'll get there on my own. Taking the heavy bags from her, John said, "Okay, but I'll walk you all the way to the entrance. Otherwise, you never know. By the way, why didn't you call your family to meet you?" Patting her pockets, the elderly woman replied sadly, "I would love to, but I left my phone at home. But I'll get there on my own, don't worry. Thanks again for your help, young man. Would you like to come to visit me? I'm a good cook, and I will definitely treat you to something tasty." The guy smiled back. "If you really want to thank me, then tell me your name and how to get to your house." After the old lady introduced herself as Sarah, they walked to her house together. After a short journey, they reached their destination. The woman invited John to come in and rest for a bit, but he politely declined, saying he had urgent matters. As soon as John left Sarah's house, he took a deep breath. The encounter with the old lady momentarily distracted him from his family troubles. He decided that he needed to focus on the task at hand, finding his mother and confronting his father. John quickly dialed Jake's number and asked him to meet. When they met at their favorite cafe, John shared everything he had learned from his grandmother. Jake listened attentively and then said, "We need to find your mother and get to the bottom of this. I have some contacts who might be able to help us with the search." With renewed determination, John and Jake began their quest to uncover the truth about John's mother and confront the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Subscribe to our channel and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.